In 2012, our next guest founded the Rainforest Connection, a nonprofit that converts recycled cell phones into solar-powered listening devices that monitor and protect remote areas of the rainforest. Please welcome Topher White to the South by Southwest studio. Topher, thanks for being here, sir.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
This is an awesome technology, and it helps fight deforestation. So, in addition to preserving life as we know it in the rainforest, right? For those who don't know, explain to us what exactly is happening with deforestation and why they should care.
Well, deforestation is certainly not a new problem. It's one that sort of changes from year to year, so it goes up and down. It's actually the second largest contributor to climate change overall. So more than all the cars, trucks, planes, ships combined. The carbon emissions are almost a fifth of all emissions around the world. And almost 90% of the logging in the rainforest is illegal. And that's not all deforestation is logging, but if you can stop the illegal logging, you can stop the roads. The roads are what lead to the destruction of a forest in small scale, like farms and fires. And so it might be the fastest, cheapest way for us to fight climate change. But the secret is that there's people on the ground who are not benefiting from this, who are brave and are willing to stand up to the cartels and, in many cases, the groups that are doing it. So we can build tech tools to help them do that and support them overall.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because someone who might be listening in Austin say, all right, deforestation, that's happening across the globe, or it's happening in different continents. Why should I care? And you're like, well, if you care about climate change.
Well, even so, there's many reasons to care.
Yeah.
Everything from human rights to life and death, to ethnic conflict, to biodiversity crises. And climate change is one of those things that has the chance to unite us all, but the sort of effects and larger sort of reasons for the climate change crisis in this case are myriad. So
Before we get into the awesome new technology that's being used to help in one way solve this problem, how did you personally get involved in this?
Well, so you mentioned in 2012 or 2011, I actually went to Borneo and rainforest of Indonesia for the first time to volunteer to Gibbon Reserve. You know gibbons?
Yeah.
They're these amazing, wild, loud apes. They move like nothing else in the forest. But there was a rescue place out there I went to volunteer for just a month and realized they had a logging issue on the outskirts. But I'm from Silicon Valley, so I was like, oh, we got to build some kind of tech tool that will allow them to know where the logging is when it happens. Because the forest is pretty large, hard to patrol on foot. So I pitched it to them. They said, yes, please build that. I did so, and then of course realized that's a bigger problem elsewhere in the world as well.
And what prompted you to go all the way there to see the gibbons?
I mean, gibbons are worth going all over the world just to
No
see
offense
here.
to the gibbons.
True.
I'm just, I don't know much about the gibbons.
Oh, well, we can play it right now. They have these amazing songs. Like it's like being on another planet. Like every movie that you hear where you arrive in a jungle on some other planet.
Oh, yeah,
they're really just playing gibbon sounds.
Oh, interesting. And I got in as soon as you said it, I'm like, the voices came. And so those are gibbons.
Those are gibbons. No, but it's like one of the cool things about this tech is that, of course, we're actually listening to the world in real time. So we're actually bringing these sounds to everybody around the world.
It's the idea of using recycled cell phones to listen. How'd you come up with that idea?
I actually came up with that idea because it was the easiest way to accomplish it. You talk about new technology. There is new tech to put into this, but the really important underlying technology, like telecommunications, fantastic processing, all that was being available at the time. 10 years ago, people were throwing away old cell phones that were more powerful than computers on their desks. So at this point, we're able to use those to sort of, jump forward about 10 or 12 steps. Like some of the most amazing technology ever built is built like on the hundreds of millions by corporations and by these, groups putting things out there on the outskirts of society. So we can sort of piggyback on that and stand on their shoulders to bring tech to the forest.
Can you take us through the process, right? Yeah. So suppose there's deforestation happening. It's happening right now as we speak. Illegal logging. Your technology comes in and does what?
Well, so get this. First, we go to a place that's threatened, or even a place that isn't necessarily threatened but could be, like the outskirts of a forest. We'll put these guardians, these solar-powered devices, up in treetops. They're basically a box with the equivalent of a cell phone inside and solar panels, so they can last for a long, long time, and powerful microphones. And they listen all the time, 24/7, and they stream all that audio 24/7 up to the cloud, where we're processing it for threats like chainsaws and gunshots, human voices, places where they shouldn't, but also so much more. And then the moment we detect those things, we can send an alert through our apps to local groups on the ground, like indigenous groups or NGOs or sometimes governments, and encourage them to show up and stop it in real time or through like organized patrols. So it ends up being these groups that aren't necessarily, you wouldn't think of them as law enforcement because there's no law enforcement in the area, but they're standing up to cartels and major networks of incredibly well-funded illegal logging networks.
I mean, if you're listening 24/7 to the forest, right? That's a pretty remarkable feat. How do you filter that? How are you on it all the time?
Well, so no one's listening to it. It's AI that's listening to it. So we capture all the audio from these places up in the cloud, and we can build neural networks to pick out the threats, things like chainsaws. They're sort of difficult for a person to hear while you're there, but computers get very good at picking it out. But the really remarkable thing is that we have all that audio. Anybody around the world can listen to every single stream coming out of the forest through our app. So we're essentially streaming live audio from the most remote places out
for a global audience.
For a global audience, like
So
right
anyone,
now, we can
even
listen
now,
in.
I could just take out a phone.
I think we gotta. I think that's how it works. We gotta listen in. But even more so, I say that it's what we can pick out not just from listening. Well, let's start. So let's listen. This is a live feed from Sumatra right now. Sumatra, Indonesia.
Yes.
One of the first places. You can hear some gibbons in the back there as well. But within this, at all times, whether it's the jungle in Borneo or the jungle in South America or Central Africa, there's just dozens of species overlapping altogether. And what we sort of came to over the last couple of years was the ability to pick out individual species, track them, track their interactions, and really track their locations so we can identify species, individual levels, just as much as we can threats.
It's, when I was researching about this, the kind of analogy I came up with was you're teaming up with the animals.
Yeah.
It's like a superhero team up without the animals even realizing, and you're listening to them to come in and help them. It's like the animal gives you an alert.
Well, so it's so funny you mentioned that because just yesterday, so back in 2014 was when we launched our Kickstarter to fund this whole thing. So this whole thing was originally a Kickstarter campaign to bring, this tech to the forest. And one of our early supporters was Neil Young, and I just sort of caught up with him in Oakland outside the Fox Theater and was like, what can you say about this tech?
Of course, Neil Young. Neil Young's always on the right side of history. Well done, Neil Young.
He's always on the right side of something, right? But but essentially he's like, what you're doing is you're getting the forest to call for help. The truth was at the time, we were just trying to build a chainsaw detector for the forest. So I was like, that's a little over the top. But then suddenly I realized 6 years later, we were actually asking the forest to tell us when the loggers are there because the animals themselves are saying, that's a person, that's a tiger, that's a jaguar. And we're becoming to understand that. So we can actually use the forest sounds itself to tell us in advance of the threats.
That's pretty fascinating what you said with the data that you've had for the past 6 years and what you and with the AI has been able to take with the data. You've seen the patterns now that if the animal, say the gibbon, makes a certain sound, that's a precursor to threat.
Yeah, so when you're out there, you can't really see like 20 feet in front of you, right? There's a tree in the way. So animals have evolved to sort of communicate or assert themselves over long, long distances. So sound is really the essence of life in a lot of these areas, whether it be under the sea or in the forest itself. And so what's amazing about it is that the animals are saying a lot. And we can use that to sort of pick out what they're saying about each other. And in many ways, those are subtleties that we ourselves, not just our ears can't hear it, whether it's high frequency or low frequency, but it's that our brains aren't built to sort of parse it out. So when we're using AI and this like large amount of data collection, we can apply big data and AI algorithms to figuring out what they're saying. It's essentially seeing into a world that humans are not physically capable or mentally capable of picking out. Like when they invented the microscope long, long ago, it allowed us to peer into a world of life that we didn't know existed. We understood bacteria and viruses and all these things that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Now, we're actually going to do the same thing with sound. It should unleash an era as important in biology and ecology as you mentioned the microscope, being able to combine AI and like large audio collection around the world to essentially add a new sense to our humans' understanding of life.
Are there any success stories?
Oh yes, I mean quite a few, but again, we have to rely upon our partners on the ground or give the credit to them.
Well, so here's an example, right? You got the technology there, you got the box with the cell phone. 24/7, we're listening to it. You got the AI parsing through all the data. The animals put up a bat signal, all right? By you can just hear them, right? And you have 6 years now where you got the data so far, but you're like, I hear a chainsaw. Alert. Tell me a good story. Tell me something practical that's happening.
So that's happening all over the world, around the place these days. I mean, we have our own team, people who communicate with rangers on the ground. So. What we found is that you have groups, let's go to Peru, for example, where there's an indigenous group that's trying to deal with pretty massive logging taking place on one side of a lake they have. It's pretty simple the way it works. We heard a chainsaw, the system heard a chainsaw on our app. It sent an alert to local groups. They checked in with us. They said, is this real? We said, yeah, it's really real. You can listen in on the app to hear what the chainsaw sounds like. And then at that point, that's when the real questions come up, like, okay, what do we do now? And so the good news is that we've done this over and over again around the world, so we can coach them on, okay, well, this is clearly probably a pretty big logging operation. Where do you think they came from? How many people are needed? Do you need law enforcement support if it's there? So it's sort of coming to the point where knowing where the threats are, originally we thought that was going to be enough for people who aren't necessarily police to go stop it, but increasingly we're finding that really the sense of collaboration and support from around the world has a much bigger effect. So we found that we don't just have to show up with the data and the insights in real time, we have to show up with the moral support and the ability to strategize and put them out there. So yeah, because it's complicated work, you know.
Yeah, well, because also when you're seeing locally, if you go to the local indigenous populations, they're usually the ones under assault from the loggers. They're usually the ones under assault from the police who might be bought off, right? It's a situation where, yeah, we know this is happening, but if we go out and actually save it, we're under threat. So you kind of need this type of multi-coalitional support to go be unleashed, right?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, and then you have to understand how dangerous it is for people who didn't necessarily sign up for violence, you know. But you know, it gets complicated because sometimes loggers themselves feel like the indigenous groups have the upper hand, and so you end up seeing the way in which power dynamics come into play here. But overall, it's important that we have a theory that the faster you can get there, the safer it is for everybody. Because if you're catching a truck full of wood on the way out, you know, crimes have been committed, you know, wrongs have been done. There's more likely to be either arrests or some kind of repercussions or violence because there's something to protect. If you can catch people on the way in, like when the truck's on the way in, there's a much lower chance of conflict.
When you say we, right? So just I want to connect the dots here. AI is the one parsing it, and then bat signal goes up. Is there a headquarters? Is there a staff? Who's the one that then takes that and connects it to the local communities?
Yeah, so the AI is basically sending alerts to their phones and to our systems. We have web and apps that we make specifically for them. So we don't stand in the way of those alerts getting right to them. And when an alert goes out, it says there's a chainsaw or a group of chainsaws here. They can listen in on the app and verify it. We could probably check some now unfortunately. But then we also realized that our team should be aware of those things too. For years, we felt that getting the data to them was going to be enough, but we realized that they want to know that we know what's there as well, so we can actually talk about it in the moment. Because it's rare. There's a funny thing that happens, and completely understandable, that the moment that you're faced with the possibility of intervening in a threat that isn't necessarily affecting you in the place where you are, you're going to find reasons to not go respond and rush into battle, so to speak, or rush into a conflict. So it really is incumbent on us to make sure that they understand everything we know and coach them towards understanding that this is what they signed up for.
So we're talking about animals, but there's also trees. Is it true that trees also listen and talk to us?
Oh, well, to us, I think when they're talking to us, who can say, they're certainly talking to each other through chemical networks and the rest. What's amazing about sound, which is really our specialty, is that it's everywhere. Like even individual cells are like roaring and
in
screaming.
Trees.
Well, in trees, yeah, because cells are full of vibrations. But increasingly, they're finding that in the soil, which of course is a complex of combination of the roots and the fungi and the animals that are down there. There's so much noise in the soil that represents the biodiversity. So increasingly, we're finding that sound is a great way to measure things that even we never thought were making noise. But yeah, trees, they move at their own kind of rate. They definitely do make some noise. There's some trees, I guess, that are known in Hawaii to moan when they're sick in a certain way. We've not yet picked that up on our system, and we could certainly try. But yeah, I do think there's ways in which sound is like life asserts itself through sound, whether it knows it. We have a heartbeat, even when we're not talking.
In a way, you can learn a lot about health and the heart itself, the way it's beating, from the sound of the heartbeat.
Yeah, like what life essentially is a source of movement and energy exchange, and that usually ends up having an acoustic element to it. So that's what's really exciting for us.
You've done this in partnership with Google and other companies.
Yeah, we're here with Hitachi actually as well. They're the ones who did some predictive analytics on what the animals are saying.
So, and perhaps this is me being too cynical, maybe it's a skeptic. You're dealing with these corporations that are using the technology to help life, help the forest. But also is there a concern here, and should people be concerned that working with these corporations that also their technology, such as Google, oftentimes has been used to not harm the forest, but harm democracy, harm information, right? So is there a way that you can make sure that this immense technology, this immense data that is being, this sound data that is pretty remarkable, that what you're telling me about, is not abused or misused by these corporations?
Such an interesting outlook. I think we live in a moment where corporations and large organizations like this have the ability to enact the greatest change the most quickly. whether it be about climate change and their ability to act to change the supply chains. They're waiting for government to incentivize them, but they can actually make those unilateral decisions to be effective.
They don't have to wait for a vote.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do a couple things. Obviously, we want to fight climate change. We also want to capture and discover things about our planet right now, whether it be the biodiversity and how life on Earth is living there and where it will go, that have to be discovered right now. And you think about the technology we're using, it was invented by these companies, right? The telecom networks, the AI, the chips, all these things that we use that we need to get it done. AI, when it comes to human data analysis, is almost reaching that point of diminishing return. And the blue ocean of information that's available to us that can lead to greater good about our understanding and our own place in the world, that's almost like something that we need the most important and most the most sort of wealthy and resourceful minds to be working on, and that is coming from the companies you talk about. But most importantly, they're so like multinational. I mean, we have great support from, as you mentioned, Google, Hitachi, Huawei is one of our biggest supporters. These are companies that certainly know each other, but everyone can't quite figure out how they feel about them. But they're all very enthusiastically and sincerely in support of this. Not because there's any money to be made from protecting the forest, but because it honestly could unlock a whole new sense of understanding of what data and what's available to us to use on Earth.
Well, you're talking about unlocking, right? And specifically, if you're talking about this technology being used for this conservation effort, especially when it comes to fighting deforestation, can this be also used to, say, fight poaching?
Yeah, and it is actually. So there's a great collection of projects in Europe, actually, which were funded by Huawei to use this technology to go and fight and catch poachers in sort of the forests and the mountains of Europe. I believe it's around Greece and Romania. These are the places where poaching is being able to be stopped by the system. And that's a gun. Once you hear a gunshot, you can tell there's something to go stop. But usually that's pretty late. So looking for human voices, looking for things that just don't belong in the forest.
You said you're from Silicon Valley. We had Neil Stephenson, sci-fi guru, here a couple of days ago. He came up in his newest book, this fictional way of not stopping climate change, but putting a Band-Aid, right? I just want to get your thoughts on this.
Sure.
The character in his book, this multi-billionaire, this heir of an oil gas company, decides, oil gas folks have destroyed the world. Let me try to do something good. So he comes up with this idea to shoot sulfur in the air, right? Because volcanoes, you should shoot sulfur in the air. And until we get to decarbonization, it's almost like a Band-Aid where you kind of protect the ozone from the sun coming in, right? So just listening to that.
Is that even sci-fi? I'm pretty sure that's an actual plan.
It's science fiction, but he says, governments, I was talking to him on the couch, he goes, governments, they work too late, countries are work too late, there's too much red tape, you're gonna need like one of these tech bros or someone to come in, and this can actually happen.
Well, so everyone yearns for the simplest, most dramatic solution to a problem, whether, and if an asteroid is coming towards the Earth, there's like one or few things you're gonna do to push it out. No reason to look at that too metaphorically. But climate change, unfortunately, just like the sources of it, is super messy. So yes, it is possible to put sulfur into the atmosphere, reflect more light, and then cool the Earth down. Is that something that a single group or a single billionaire could do? Because that seems to be the plot of as many James Bond films as anything else. I do think that the most ethical way to approach this is in the messy way that everyone plays a role in. And I think Paul Hawken and the group over at Drawdown is doing a great job of showing that there are 150 solutions, not just like stopping climate change, but reversing it in a certain sense. But that's not going to come from a single scary solution that will have consequences. And I do respect people who are willing to think really big. I don't think that they should be dismissed. I don't think they should be villainized. But at the same time, the most realistic solution is one that no individual can take credit for, I'd say.
We're living through a lot right now. It's the pandemic, it's climate change, it's income inequality. We can go down the list of horrors. What personally is giving you joy and hope right now?
Well, it's something about being alive at this moment in time. We talk about climate change, we talk about the things that are there. So much of history has a chance of repeating itself. But when you look at biodiversity, I spent a lot of time listening to animals and understanding what they're trying to do, or like how they're living. This is possibly the most interesting, sometimes depressing moment of change in all of human history, both in the past and the future. There's no point in the rest of our existence as a species that there will be as much biodiversity on Earth. More animals are alive interacting now than there ever will be again. And it's also the moment of most incredible change. Like the species are not just going extinct, because they certainly are, but they're adapting. They're changing their entire way of living as they have, for millions of years. There's so much information there, and it's incumbent upon us to be alive at this moment. Like, what does it mean to be alive right now? I think it's we must capture this. We must make it still. We must capture it and record it so that people in the future can study it. A few hundred years from now, people are going to look back and say, "Wow, I wanted to study life. That was the moment of the most change. Like, this is probably the most interesting moment in life on Earth since we as a species have been here." So I feel like we have a mission right now. We have 10, 20 years at the most to capture as much biodiversity in terms of, through sound in our case and others, so that hundreds of years from now, people can look back and study it. Like, imagine if you could hear a Tyrannosaurus Rex. There's entire scientists who are trying to figure out what they sounded like. But that might still be the case 200 years from now from birds and animals that are alive today. Like, we can fix that. And so that makes me optimistic that we still have a chance to not let what's happening in front of us right now go away forever.
I appreciate your optimism. I appreciate your work, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
That's Topher, by the way. He's helping save the world one cell phone at a time. Don't forget, you can watch all of our studio interviews on the South by Southwest TV app, available on Apple TV, Roku, Android TV, and Amazon Fire. These interviews are also available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SXSW. And for a complete list of our interview schedule, check out sxsw.com/studio. I'm Wajahat Ali. Thanks for watching.